When my daughter got married, I had already hidden the $10,000 fortune left by her mother. Thank God I did, because a week later, my son-in-law showed up at my door with a notary, trying to force me to sign it over. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I was sitting in my favorite chair reading the morning paper when the doorbell rang. 7:30 in the morning seemed awfully early for visitors, but I figured it might be the mailman with a package. What I found when I opened the door made my blood run cold. There stood my son-in-law, Julian, dressed in an expensive suit I'd never seen before, flanked by a woman I didn't recognize, carrying a leather briefcase. His usual charming smile was nowhere to be found. Instead, his face wore an expression I'd never seen before. Cold, calculating, almost predatory. "Good morning, Robert," he said, pushing past me into my living room without waiting for an invitation. "We need to talk." The woman followed him in, her heels clicking against my hardwood floors. She set her briefcase on my coffee table with the kind of authority that made my stomach twist. "This is Miss Flores," Julian continued, not bothering with pleasantries. "She's a notary public. We have some documents that need your signature." I felt my legs go weak. After 40 years in construction, I'd learned to read people, and everything about this situation screamed danger. The Julian I knew, the one who'd courted my daughter Serafina for 18 months, who'd asked for my blessing before proposing, would never barge into my home like this. "What kind of documents?" I managed to ask, though my mouth felt dry as sandpaper. Julian pulled out a thick stack of papers from his briefcase. "Transfer documents for Serafina's inheritance. It's time she received what's rightfully hers." My heart started pounding so hard I was sure they could hear it. The inheritance, the $10 million my beloved wife Victoria had left to Serafina. The money I'd hidden away 6 months ago because something deep in my gut told me to protect it. "I don't understand," I said, trying to buy time to think. Serafina never mentioned wanting access to her mother's money. Julian's smile was thin and sharp. "Of course she does. She's just too polite to ask her father directly. That's why I'm here to help facilitate this." The notary opened her briefcase and pulled out an official stamp. "Mr. Thompson, if you could just review these documents and provide your signature where indicated, we can have this completed in a matter of minutes." I stared at the papers in Julian's hands, my mind racing. Something was very wrong here. Serafina had never shown much interest in her mother's inheritance. In fact, she'd always said she was grateful I was managing it for her. We'd had that conversation just last Christmas. "Where's Serafina?" I asked. "If this is what she wants, why isn't she here herself?" Julian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "She's at work. She doesn't like dealing with financial matters. You know how she is. She asked me to handle this for her." That was the first outright lie, and we both knew it. Serafina was a nurse practitioner who managed budgets for her entire department. She was anything but uncomfortable with financial matters. "I'd prefer to discuss this with my daughter first," I said, crossing my arms. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Julian exchanged a look with the notary that I didn't like one bit. "Robert," Julian said, his voice taking on a harder edge, "I think you're misunderstanding the situation here. This isn't a request. Serafina is entitled to this inheritance, and frankly, keeping it from her any longer could be seen as elder financial abuse. Elder financial abuse. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. He was threatening me. "That's quite an accusation," I said, my own voice getting harder, especially coming from someone who's only been part of this family for 10 months. Julian stood up abruptly, towering over me. At 64, I wasn't the imposing figure I used to be, and he knew it. "Look, old man," he said, dropping any pretense of civility. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way, but those documents are getting signed today." The old man comment stung, but it also cleared my head. This wasn't about Serafina's inheritance. This was about Julian's greed. Everything started clicking into place. The rushed engagement after Victoria's death. The expensive lifestyle he'd been living despite his modest teaching salary. The way he'd been asking probing questions about our family's finances. "Get out of my house," I said quietly. Julian laughed. "I don't think so. Not until you sign those papers." I walked to my landline phone and picked up the receiver. "Then I'm calling the police." "And telling them what?" Julian sneered. "That your son-in-law wants you to give your daughter her own inheritance. Good luck with that." My hand hovered over the phone. He was right in a way. On paper, this looked like a family financial discussion, but every instinct I had was screaming that this was wrong. "I'm calling Serafina," I said instead. "No, you're not." Julian stepped toward me, and for a moment I thought he might actually try to stop me physically. "Serafina is at the hospital. She can't be disturbed." I dialed anyway. The phone rang 4 times before going to voicemail. "Serafina, honey, it's Dad. I need you to call me right away. It's important." When I hung up, Julian was smiling that cold smile again. "She won't call you back. Robert, I've told her how you've been behaving lately. How confused you've seemed. How worried we are about your memory." The implication was clear. He'd been setting me up, making Serafina think I was becoming senile or incompetent. The calculating nature of it made my skin crawl. "You have 1 hour to think about this," Julian said, motioning to the notary to pack up her things. "We'll be back, and next time we won't be so patient." After they left, I sat in my chair with my head in my hands. How had I not seen this coming? All the signs had been there. Julian's sudden interest in our family after Victoria's funeral, the way he'd inserted himself into every financial conversation, the expensive purchases he'd been making. But the worst part was knowing that somehow he'd turned my daughter against me. 6 months earlier, I'd made the decision that would save my daughter's future, though she'd never know it at the time. I was sitting beside Victoria's hospital bed, holding her hand as the machines beeped steadily around us. Lung cancer had taken so much from her, her strength, her beautiful laugh, her plans for retirement. But her mind remained sharp until the very end. "Robert," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum of the oxygen machine. "Promise me something." I squeezed her hand gently. "Anything, sweetheart. Promise me you'll protect Serafina from the vultures." At the time, I thought she was being dramatic. Victoria had always been the more cautious one in our marriage, the one who saw danger where I saw opportunity. But her next words made my blood chill. "That boy she's been seeing. Julian, there's something wrong with him." I frowned. "What do you mean? He seems nice enough." Victoria's grip on my hand tightened with surprising strength. "He asks too many questions about money. About the house, about my insurance policy, about what we've saved. Nice boys don't do that." I wanted to argue to tell her she was being paranoid, but the look in her eyes stopped me. Victoria had worked as a bank manager for 30 years before retiring. She'd seen every type of financial predator that existed. "What do you want me to do?" I asked. "Hide the inheritance, all of it. Put it somewhere he can't touch it, can't even find it. Let Serafina think it's smaller than it is, or that there are legal complications. I don't care what you tell her. Just keep it safe, Robert. That's $10 million. I can't just hide that kind of money." Her eyes blazed with the intensity I'd fallen in love with 42 years earlier. "You can and you will. Promise me, Robert. Promise me you won't let some gold digger steal our daughter's future." 3 days later, Victoria was gone. Julian had been at the hospital constantly playing the role of the devoted future son-in-law. He brought flowers, coffee, even offered to help with funeral arrangements. At the time, I was grateful for his support. It wasn't until I was going through Victoria's papers that I started to see what she'd seen. Hidden in her jewelry box, I found a small notebook filled with her careful handwriting. Observations about Julian that made my stomach turn. How he'd steered every conversation toward our financial situation. How he'd volunteered to help with paperwork after her diagnosis. How he'd casually asked about life insurance policies and investment accounts. Victoria had been watching him, documenting his behavior, and she'd seen right through his act. That's when I made the call to our family lawyer, Leo Thompson. Leo had been handling our affairs for 20 years, and I trusted him completely. "I need to restructure Serafina's inheritance," I told him during our meeting in his downtown office. "Move it into a trust that can't be accessed without very specific conditions." Leo raised an eyebrow. "That's unusual, Robert. Most parents want to make inheritance as simple as possible for their children." Yi explained Victoria's concerns, showed him the notebook. Leo listened without judgment. He'd seen enough family drama in his career to know that Victoria's instincts were probably right. "We can set up an irrevocable trust," he said finally. "But once it's done, even you won't be able to change it without going to court." "Are you sure about this?" I thought about Victoria's last words, about the promises I'd made. "I'm sure it took 6 weeks to complete all the paperwork." During that time, Julian became even more attentive. He helped me organize Victoria's belongings, insisted on cooking dinner for me twice a week, and gradually began asking more direct questions about the estate. "I just want to make sure Serafina is taken care of," he'd say with that charming smile. "You know how she worries about money." But Serafina had never worried about money a day in her life. We'd raised her to be responsible, but not anxious about finances. That was Julian projecting his own concerns. The day I signed the final trust documents, I felt both relief and dread. Relief that Victoria's money was safe. Dread because I knew this would eventually cause problems. But I'd kept my promise. I told Serafina there were complications with the estate, that the lawyers were still sorting things out. She seemed unconcerned, too wrapped up in her grief and her new relationship to press for details. Julian, however, started asking pointed questions about timelines and legal requirements. The engagement came 3 months after Victoria's funeral. Too soon, in my opinion, but Serafina seemed happy. Julian was attentive, romantic, everything a grieving daughter could want in a partner. He even insisted on a modest wedding, claiming he didn't believe in expensive ceremonies. At the time, I thought that showed character. Now I realized he was just being practical. Why waste money on a wedding when there were millions to be claimed later? The wedding 10 months ago had been small, but beautiful. I walked Serafina down the aisle, trying to ignore the voice in my head that sounded suspiciously like Victoria, warning me about what I was doing. Julian had been the perfect groom, attentive, loving, seemingly devoted to my daughter. But things started changing almost immediately after the honeymoon. Serafina began calling less frequently. When she did call, Julian was often in the background, contributing to the conversation, steering it toward practical matters. She started cancelling our weekly dinners, claiming she was busy with work or that Julian had made other plans. Most telling of all, she started asking about the inheritance. Not directly. Serafina was too polite for that, but in roundabout ways. Have the lawyers made any progress, or do you think it'll be much longer before everything's settled? I knew those weren't her questions. Julian was coaching her, probably telling her that her father was being unnecessarily slow or even obstructive about her mother's estate. The final straw came last month when they showed up unannounced for dinner. I'd made Victoria's famous pot roast, hoping to recapture some of the warmth we'd lost. But the entire evening felt staged. Julian dominated the conversation, asking detailed questions about my own finances, my retirement plans, even my health. We just want to make sure you're taking care of yourself, Dad, Serafina had said. But her words sounded rehearsed. That night, after they left, I called Leo Thompson. I think it's starting, I told him. Victoria was right. The trust is solid, Leo assured me. Even if he somehow forces you to sign something, he can't touch that money. But Robert, this is going to get ugly before it gets better. Now sitting in my living room after Julian's threatening visit, I realized just how ugly it was about to become. My daughter's husband wasn't just a gold digger. He was a predator who'd spent months carefully planning this assault on our family's finances. The worst part was knowing that Serafina was completely under his influence, believing whatever lies he'd told her about my mental state or my motives for delaying her inheritance. I looked at the framed photo of Victoria on the side table, the one taken on our last anniversary. She was smiling, but her eyes held that knowing look she got when she was proven right about something. "You saw him coming, didn't you, sweetheart?" I whispered to the photograph. "Now I just have to figure out how to save our little girl." The phone finally rang at 3 in the afternoon. I'd been pacing my living room for hours, alternating between worry and anger when Serafina's name appeared on the caller ID. "Dad." Her voice sounded strained, different somehow. "Julian said you called this morning. Is everything okay?" I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. "Honey, I need to see you alone. Can you come over?" There was a pause, and I could hear muffled conversation in the background. Julian was there listening, probably coaching her responses. "I'm actually pretty busy today," she said finally. "Can't we just talk on the phone?" "Serafina, this is important. It's about your mother's inheritance." Another pause longer this time. "Dad," Julian explained what happened this morning. "I know you're upset about the paperwork, but we really do need to get this sorted out." My heart sank. Julian had already gotten to her, spun his version of events. What exactly did he tell you? That you got confused when he tried to help with the legal documents? "Dad, are you feeling okay? You've seemed a little scattered lately." Scattered? That was Julian's word, not Serafina's. My daughter had never talked to me like this before, with this tone of patient concern, as if I were a child who needed managing. "I'm fine, sweetheart, but I need you to understand something. Julian didn't come here to help with paperwork. He came here with a notary and tried to force me to sign over your inheritance." "Force you?" Serafina's voice got sharper. "Dad, that's ridiculous." Julian was trying to help streamline the process. "You've been saying for months that the lawyers are taking too long." I felt my chest tighten. She was defending him automatically, without even considering that her husband might have ulterior motives. "Serafina, listen to me. Your mother made me promise to protect that inheritance. There's more money involved than you know. And Julian, stop." Her voice was cold now, colder than I'd ever heard it. "Just stop, Dad. I can't believe you're making accusations like this about my husband." "I'm not making accusations. I'm telling you what happened. You're telling me your version of what happened." "Julian said you seemed paranoid, that you accused him of trying to steal from the family." "Dad, that's not normal behavior." The word paranoid hit me like a slap. It was another of Julian's words, another seed he'd planted in my daughter's mind. How long had he been building this narrative? How many conversations had he had with Serafina about my supposed mental decline? When was the last time we had dinner together? I asked suddenly. "Just you and me." Serafina was quiet for a moment. "I don't know. Why does that matter?" "It matters because Julian has been systematically isolating you from me." "Think about it, honey. When did you stop coming over for our weekly dinners? When did you stop calling me just to chat?" "I've been busy," she said. But there was less certainty in her voice now. "Busy, or has Julian been making other plans for you? Has he been suggesting that I'm getting too old, too forgetful, too much trouble to deal with?" "Dad, you're scaring me. You're talking like Julian is some kind of manipulator or something, isn't he?" The silence stretched between us. I could almost hear her thinking, questioning, maybe remembering things she'd dismissed or explained away. "He loves me," she said finally. But her voice was smaller now. "I'm sure he does. But he loves your money more. That's a horrible thing to say. It's the truth, Serafina. How much do you know about Julian's finances, his debts, his spending habits before he married you? We don't talk about money much. He says it's not romantic. Another red flag." Victoria and I had always been open about finances with each other. It was one of the foundations of a strong marriage. "Has he ever asked you to co-sign for anything? Credit cards, loans, investments?" "Well," she hesitated, "he mentioned adding me to his business account for tax purposes." My blood ran cold. What business account? His consulting business? He said it would be easier if we filed taxes jointly if I was technically a partner. There was no consulting business. Julian was a substitute teacher who worked maybe 3 days a week. This was just another way to get access to her money, her credit, her financial life. "Serafina, has he asked you to put any of your own money into this business?" "Not much. Just $7,000 to help with startup costs." "Dad, why are you asking all these questions? $7,000. It wasn't much compared to the inheritance, but it was the first step. Test the waters. See how easily she could be convinced to hand over money." "Honey, I need you to come over here tonight and don't tell Julian where you're going. I can't do that. We don't keep secrets from each other. But he's keeping secrets from you. What are you talking about?" I took a deep breath. This was the moment of truth. Your mother's inheritance isn't held up in legal complications. I moved it into a protected trust 6 months ago because I was worried about exactly what happened this morning. "You what?" There's $10 million. Serafina $10 million, and I hid it because your mother made me promise to protect it from men like Julian." The silence on the other end of the phone was deafening. I could hear her breathing fast and shallow. $10 million, she whispered. "Your mother was a smart woman. She saw through Julian's act before any of us did. She made me promise to keep the money safe until you were truly ready for it." Ready for it? I'm 39 years old, Dad. I think I'm ready to handle my own inheritance. Are you? Or would Julian be handling it for you? Another long pause. I could almost hear the wheels turning in her head, connecting dots she'd been ignoring. "He's been asking about the timeline," she said slowly. "About when the lawyers might finish their work. And he's been frustrated that it's taking so long. What has he said exactly? That your lawyers are probably incompetent. That we should get our own attorney to speed things up. He even suggested we could sue for delays." Every word confirmed my worst fears. Julian had been building a case, gathering information, preparing for exactly the kind of aggressive move he'd made this morning. "Serafina, I need you to think about something. When did Julian first bring up marriage? Was it before or after your mother's diagnosis?" I heard her sharp intake of breath. "Dad, you can't be suggesting." "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm asking you to remember." A long silence, then in a voice barely above a whisper after. "It was after Mum got sick. He said life was too short to wait." "And when did he start asking about finances?" "Around the same time. But that's normal when you're planning a future together, right?" "Is it? Did I ask your mother about money when we were dating?" "No, but that was different. You were both young. Neither of you had much." "Exactly. People who love you for you don't care about your bank account. But people who love your money, they care very much." I could hear crying now, soft sobs that broke my heart. My daughter was finally seeing the truth, and it was destroying her. "What am I supposed to do?" she whispered. "If you're right, if he really is, what am I supposed to do?" "You're supposed to come home," I said gently. "Come talk to your father. Let me help you figure this out." "I can't. He'll know something's wrong. He always knows." The fear in her voice made my hands shake with rage. What had this man done to my confident, strong daughter? "Then we'll figure out another way. But Serafina, you have to promise me something. Don't sign anything he gives you. Don't give him any more money. And don't tell him about this conversation. He'll ask where I went if I come see you. Tell him you went shopping. Tell him you had to work late. Tell him anything, but don't let him know that you're starting to see through his lies." After I hung up, I sat in my chair with my head in my hands. My daughter was trapped in a marriage with a predator. And the worst part was that she was only just beginning to understand how deep the manipulation went. But at least now she was starting to wake up. And that gave me hope that we could still save her before Julian destroyed everything Victoria and I had worked our whole lives to build. 2 days passed before Julian made his next move. And when it came, it was more sophisticated than I'd expected. I was making coffee Thursday morning when my neighbor Maya knocked on my door. She lived next door, and we'd been friends for 15 years. Ever since she and her husband moved in after retiring from the school district. "Robert," she said, her face creased with concern, "I hope you don't mind me asking, but are you doing okay?" I frowned, setting down my coffee mug. "I'm fine, Maya. Why do you ask?" "Well, it's just that your son-in-law stopped by yesterday." "Julian? He seemed really worried about you." My blood pressure spiked. Julian was here, not here exactly. He was at my house asking if I'd noticed any changes in your behavior lately. He said the family was concerned that you might be having some memory issues. The calculating bastard! He was building a case, gathering witness statements to support his claim that I was mentally incompetent. What did you tell him? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Maya looked uncomfortable. I told him you seemed fine to me, but then he mentioned some things that made me wonder if maybe I just hadn't noticed. What kind of things? He said you'd been confused about financial matters, that you'd made some accusations against him that didn't make sense. He showed me his phone, said you'd left him a voicemail calling him a thief. I had done exactly that Tuesday night, after a few too many beers and a lot of anger. But hearing it described second-hand out of context, it did sound like the ravings of a confused old man. He also said you'd been paranoid about the mail, checking it multiple times a day, worried that people were trying to steal your information. That hit closer to home. I had been watching the mail carefully lately, worried that Julian might try to intercept financial documents or legal correspondence, but again, without context, it sounded like elder paranoia. Maya, I need you to understand something. Julian is not what he seems. He's trying to get access to Serafina's inheritance, and he's using these accusations about my mental state to justify it. Maya's expression grew more concerned, not less. Oh, Robert, that's exactly what he said, you might say. The trap was perfect. Anything I said to defend myself would sound like exactly the kind of paranoid accusation an incompetent person would make. Julian had thought this through carefully. Did he ask you to do anything? Maya nodded reluctantly. He asked if I would keep an eye on you, maybe check in more often. He gave me his phone number in case I noticed anything concerning. After Maya left, I called Leo Thompson immediately. They're building a competency case, Leo said after I explained what had happened. If they can convince a judge that you're mentally unfit, they might be able to challenge the trust or even get a conservatorship established. Can they do that? It's possible, especially if they have multiple witnesses saying you're acting paranoid or confused. The good news is that the trust is ironclad. Even if you were declared incompetent, it wouldn't automatically give them access to the money. But it could tie things up in court for years. Years I might not have at my age, and years during which Julian would have complete control over Serafina. What do? Document everything, every interaction, every conversation, and whatever you do, don't give them any ammunition. No angry phone calls, no confrontations, nothing that could be interpreted as irrational behavior. That afternoon, I got a call from Dr. Eva Olson, my longtime physician. Robert, I had an interesting conversation today. Your son-in-law called to express some concerns about your mental health. What kind of concerns? Memory issues, confusion, possible early-stage dementia. He asked if I'd noticed anything during your recent visits. I felt a chill run down my spine. And what did you tell him? I told him that I couldn't discuss your medical information with him, even his family, without your written consent. But I am curious. Have you been experiencing any memory problems? None whatsoever, Dr. Olson. Julian is trying to have me declared incompetent so he can get access to my daughter's inheritance. There was a pause. That's a serious accusation, Robert. It's the truth. He came to my house with a notary 2 days ago, trying to force me to sign over $10 million. $10 million? Dr. Olson's voice sharpened. You never mentioned that kind of money during our discussions about estate planning, because I moved it into a trust to protect it from exactly this kind of situation. Another pause. Robert, I'm going to suggest something and I want you to hear me out. Why don't you come in for a comprehensive mental health evaluation? If Julian is making these accusations, having documented proof of your competency might be useful. It was a good idea, but it also felt like surrendering to Julian's game. Still, I made the appointment for the following week. That evening, Serafina called. Her voice was strained, and I could tell she'd been crying. "Dad, Julian wants me to ask you something. What is it, honey?" "He wants to know if you'd be willing to see a doctor about the memory issues." "What memory issues?" "I don't have any memory issues." "Dad, please don't get angry. He's just worried about you. We both are. Has he given you any examples of these supposed memory problems? He said you called him a thief, that you accused him of trying to steal from the family." "Dad, that's not like you. It's exactly like me when someone tries to steal from my family." "You're doing it again," she said, her voice breaking. "You're being paranoid." "Serafina, think about this logically. If I was really having memory problems, would I be able to run my own household, manage my own finances, take care of myself completely independently? Maybe it's just starting. Maybe it's just when you get stressed or emotional." Julian had covered all the bases. Stress-related cognitive decline, emotional instability, conditions that would be difficult to disprove and easy to explain away. "Sweetheart, I want you to do something for me. I want you to ask Julian to show you the business account he had you invest in." "What?" "The consulting business you put $7,000 into. Ask to see the bank statements, the business license, the client contracts." "Dad, I can't just yes, you can. You're an investor now. Remember? You have every right to see where your money went. Why would you want me to do that?" "Because I don't think there is a business. I think Julian took your money and spent it." Or the silence on the other end was deafening. "That's a horrible thing to say about my husband." "Then prove me wrong. Ask to see the paperwork. I'm not going to spy on my own husband based on your paranoid suspicions. It's not spying to ask about your own investment." But she'd already hung up. An hour later, my phone rang again. This time it was Julian. "We need to talk," he said without preamble. "I think we've said everything we need to say." "No, old man, we haven't. See, I've been talking to some people today. Neighbors, doctors, people who care about your well-being. And I'm hearing some concerning things such as you're clearly experiencing some kind of mental decline, making wild accusations, acting paranoid, harassing family members. It's sad, really." "What do you want, Julian?" "I want you to sign those papers today, before this gets any uglier. And if I don't, then tomorrow I file for emergency guardianship of your affairs. I've got 3 witnesses who will testify that you're mentally unfit, plus medical concerns documented by your doctor's office. How do you think that's going to go for you?" The threat was clear. Submit to his demands or face a legal battle that could strip me of all my rights and leave Serafina completely under his control. "You're not getting that money," I said quietly. Julian laughed. "We'll see about that. By the way, I'd stay away from Serafina for a while. She's pretty upset about your behavior lately. Wouldn't want to make things worse by having another one of your episodes in front of her." After he hung up, I sat in my darkened living room, feeling more alone than I had since Victoria died. Julian had isolated me from my daughter, turned my neighbors against me, and was building a legal case to have me declared incompetent. But he'd made one mistake. He'd underestimated how far a father would go to protect his child. I pulled out my phone and called Leo Thompson again. Don, I need you to prepare for war. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. It was Friday evening when my phone rang, and I was surprised to see Serafina's number at 9:30 p.m. Dad. Her voice was shaky, different from the controlled tone she'd been using lately. Can you come pick me up? Where are you, honey? I'm at the Starbucks on Maple Street. I can't drive right now. 20 minutes later, I found my daughter sitting in the corner of the coffee shop, her hands wrapped around a cup that had clearly gone cold hours ago. Her eyes were red and swollen, and she looked smaller somehow, like the confident woman she'd been had been hollowed out. What happened? I asked, sitting down across from her. She stared into her coffee cup for a long moment before speaking. I asked about the business account. My heart clenched, and there is no business account. There's no consulting business. There's no anything. Her voice cracked. The $7,000 I gave him, he spent it on a down payment for a motorcycle. I reached across the table and took her hand. She didn't pull away. When I confronted him about it, he got angry, really angry. Did he hurt you? Not physically, but Dad, the things he said. She looked up at me with eyes full of pain. He called me stupid for questioning him. Said I didn't understand business and should leave financial decisions to him. And then he said something that made everything click into place. I waited, letting her take her time. He said I was starting to sound like my paranoid father, and that maybe mental illness ran in the family. The manipulation was even worse than I'd thought. Julian had been laying groundwork to make Serafina question her own sanity if she ever started seeing through his lies. That's when I remembered something Mum used to say. Serafina continued. She always told me that if someone tried to make me doubt my own perceptions, that was a sign they were lying to me. Victoria's wisdom, reaching out from beyond to protect our daughter. So, I started looking through his things while he was in the shower. I found his laptop open, and Dad, there were emails. What kind of emails? Serafina pulled out her phone with shaking hands. I took pictures. I don't know if this was legal, but I was scared and I had to know. She showed me the screen. The first email was from someone named Derek, dated 3 weeks before Victoria's funeral. The cancer timeline looks good. You should have a clear path to the inheritance within 6 months if you play this right. Remember, grief makes people vulnerable. Be the supportive boyfriend, not the eager gold digger. My blood turned to ice as I read Julian's response. Already working on it. The old man trusts me, and Serafina is completely dependent on me for emotional support. The mother was the only one who saw through me. But that problem is solving itself. There are dozens of these, Serafina whispered, going back almost 2 years. Dad, he wasn't dating me. He was hunting me. She scrolled to another exchange. This one more recent. Derek, what's the hold-up with the money? Julian, the old bastard hid it somehow, but I'm building a competency case. With the right legal pressure, I should be able to get control within a few months. Derek, what about the wife, Julian? Completely manipulated. She thinks her father is going senile, and I'm the only one looking out for her interests. By the time this is over, she'll be grateful I saved her from his mental decline. I felt sick reading it, but I forced myself to keep going. The final email was from just yesterday. Derek, how much are we talking about here, Julian? $10 million plus whatever else the old man has saved. Enough to disappear and start over somewhere warm. The wife won't be a problem. She's too emotional and dependent to function without me anyway. He was planning to leave you. I said quietly. After he got the money, Serafina nodded, tears streaming down her face. The whole marriage was fake. Every "I love you," every romantic gesture, every time he held me when I was grieving Mom. It was all an act. I moved around the table and put my arm around her shoulders. She collapsed against me, sobbing with the kind of deep-wrenching grief that comes from having your entire world revealed as a lie. "How could I have been so stupid?" she whispered. "You weren't stupid. You were grieving and vulnerable, and he took advantage of that. This isn't your fault, honey." But the signs were there. The questions about money. The way he inserted himself into every financial conversation. How he always seemed to know exactly what to say because he'd done this before. Those emails mention other targets, other women he'd manipulated. You weren't his first victim. We sat there for a long time. My daughter crying for the life she'd thought she had. The husband she'd thought loved her. The future that had been nothing but a predator's fantasy. Finally, she pulled back and wiped her eyes. "What do we do now? Now we protect you, and we make sure he can't do this to anyone else. But I'm married to him. Legally, he has rights to my assets, doesn't he? Not to the inheritance. That's safe in the trust. But anything you've acquired since the marriage could be at risk in a divorce." "Divorce?" She said the word like it was foreign. God! "Dad, I don't even know where to start. We start with getting you somewhere safe. You're not going back to that house tonight. I have to. My things are there. And if he realizes I know, then he might get desperate. Desperate people do dangerous things." Serafina's face went pale. "You think he'd hurt me?" "I think he's a predator who's been exposed, and that makes him unpredictable. I'm not taking any chances with your safety." We drove to my house in silence, both of us processing the magnitude of what we discovered. As we pulled into my driveway, Serafina's phone buzzed with a text message. "It's him," she said, her voice tight with fear. "He's asking where I am. What do you want to tell him?" "I don't know. If I don't answer, he'll get suspicious. But I can't pretend everything's normal. Tell him you're staying with a friend tonight. That you needed some space to think about our argument." She typed the message with shaking fingers. The response came back almost immediately. "He wants to know which friend. He says he's worried about me and wants to make sure I'm safe. Even now, he was trying to maintain control to monitor her movements. Tell him it's someone from work, and you don't want to drag him into family drama." The next text was more aggressive. "I'm your husband. I have the right to know where you are." Serafina stared at the screen, and I could see the moment she really understood what she'd been living with. Not love, not protection, but possession and control. "Turn off your phone," I said gently. "Tomorrow we'll figure out the next steps, but tonight you need to rest." Inside my house, I made up the guest room while Serafina sat at the kitchen table, still clutching her phone like evidence of a crime. Which, in a way, it was. "Dad," she said, as I brought her a cup of tea. "I owe you an apology. All those things I said about you being paranoid about memory problems. I'm so sorry. You don't need to apologize. He manipulated you into believing those things. But I should have trusted you. You're my father. You've never lied to me. You were protecting your marriage. That's what people in love do. They protect their partners. The fact that your partner didn't deserve protection isn't your fault." She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "How did Mom know?" How did she see through him when I couldn't? Your mother dealt with financial predators for 30 years at the bank. She knew the signs, but more than that, she wasn't emotionally invested in him. She could see him clearly because she didn't need to believe he was good. I needed to believe it. Of course, you did. You just lost your mother, and he offered you comfort and companionship. There's nothing wrong with wanting love, Serafina. But there's everything wrong with falling for a lie. I sat down beside her and took her hands in mine. The only person who did anything wrong here is Julian. He's the one who lied, who manipulated, who built an entire fake relationship to steal from you. Don't you dare blame yourself for his crimes. That night, I lay awake listening to my daughter cry in the guest room, and I thought about Victoria's last words to me. Protect Serafina from the vultures. I'd hidden the money, but I hadn't been able to protect her from the emotional devastation of discovering that her marriage was built on lies. But she was safe now, and she knew the truth. Tomorrow, we'd start building her real life back. 6 months later, I sat in my backyard watching Serafina plant roses in the garden bed Victoria had always tended. The divorce had been finalized 2 weeks ago, and my daughter was finally starting to look like herself again. The legal battle had been uglier than we'd anticipated. Julian had fought the divorce viciously at first, claiming that Serafina was having a breakdown and couldn't make rational decisions. He'd even tried to use his manufactured evidence of my supposed mental decline to suggest that our entire family was unstable. But those emails had been our salvation. Leo Thompson had worked with a computer forensics expert to verify their authenticity, and they'd painted a clear picture of fraud and manipulation that no judge could ignore. The case had been so strong that the prosecutor had decided to file criminal charges for attempted theft and conspiracy. Julian's partner Derek, it turned out, had been running similar cons across 3 states. They'd targeted at least 6 other women, all recently widowed, all with substantial inheritances. Serafina wasn't their first victim, but she would be their last. "The detective called this morning," Serafina said, brushing dirt off her hands as she stood up. "Julian pleaded guilty to avoid trial. He got 18 months. How do you feel about that?" She considered the question carefully. My daughter had been in therapy since leaving Julian, working through the trauma of emotional manipulation and rebuilding her sense of self-worth. "I feel like it's enough," she said finally. "I don't need him to suffer. I just need him to be gone." The financial aftermath had been manageable. Julian had spent most of Serafina's $7,000, but we'd recovered some of it. More importantly, the inheritance had remained completely untouched. Victoria's $10 million was still safely held in trust, waiting for Serafina to be ready to manage it. "I've been thinking about the money," Serafina said, as if reading my thoughts. "Oh, I want to do something meaningful with part of it, something Mom would have approved of." We'd had this conversation several times over the past few months. Serafina felt guilty about the inheritance, as if having money made her a target for future predators. But gradually she was beginning to see it as an opportunity, rather than a burden. "What did you have in mind?" "There's a program at the community college for women re-entering the workforce after divorce or widowhood. They need funding for childcare and job training. I thought maybe I could endow a scholarship program. It was perfect." Victoria had always believed in helping women become financially independent, and this would honor her memory while protecting other potential victims from predators like Julian. "I think your mother would love that," I said, "and I want to keep working. Not because I have to now, but because I want to. The inheritance will be there when I'm ready to retire, but right now I need to remember who I am outside of being someone's target." The strength in her voice reminded me so much of Victoria that it took my breath away. My daughter had been broken down, manipulated, and betrayed, but she'd rebuilt herself into something stronger than before. "There's something else," Serafina said, sitting down in the chair beside me. "I want to change my name back to Thompson." The marriage had lasted 10 months, but it had taken 6 months of legal proceedings to completely untangle herself from Julian's web. Changing her name back felt like the final step in reclaiming her identity. "I'd be honored to have you back in the family name," I said. "Dad, I never left the family, even when I was defending him. Even when I thought you were." She trailed off, still unable to say the words about my supposed mental decline. "You were protecting your marriage. I understand that. No, I was being controlled. There's a difference." Her voice was firm. My therapist helped me see that. Julian didn't just steal money. He stole my ability to think clearly, to trust my own judgment, to maintain relationships with people who actually loved me. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the late afternoon sun filter through the oak tree Victoria had planted when we first bought the house. It had been a sapling then, barely 3 eftel tall. Now it towered over the yard, its branches providing shade for the entire garden. I had lunch with Maya yesterday. I said she apologized again for believing Julian's stories about my mental state. She should apologize. She was ready to believe the worst about you based on the word of someone she barely knew. She was trying to be helpful. Julian was very convincing. That's what makes people like him so dangerous. Serafina said they're not obviously evil. They're charming and sympathetic. And they know exactly how to make people want to help them. The front doorbell rang, interrupting our conversation. Serafina went to answer it while I stayed in the garden, enjoying the peace of the evening. A few minutes later, she returned with a large envelope. "It's from Leo's office," she said, opening it carefully. Inside were the final legal documents, transferring control of the trust to Serafina. At 39, she was ready to manage her mother's inheritance independently. The lengthy process had been designed to ensure she had time to heal from Julian's manipulation and develop confidence in her own judgment. "It's really over," she said, staring at the papers. "No, honey, it's really beginning." That evening, we had dinner at the small table Victoria and I had shared for 42 years. Serafina had cooked pot roast, the same recipe Victoria had made every Sunday when Serafina was growing up. We talked about everything and nothing. The easy conversation of family members who trusted each other completely. After dinner, Serafina pulled out a small wrapped box. "I found this in Mom's jewelry box last week when I was going through her things," she said. There was a note with it. Inside the box was Victoria's wedding ring, the simple gold band I'd placed on her finger all those years ago. The note in Victoria's careful handwriting read, "For Serafina, when she finds someone who loves her for all the right reasons, love, Mom." She knew I'd need to start over, Serafina said, tears in her eyes. She knew that someday I'd want to love again, and she wanted me to have something pure to remember what real love looks like. "Your mother was always planning ahead. Will you walk me down the aisle again someday? If I ever find someone worth marrying, honey, I'd be honored. But next time, I'm doing a much more thorough background check." We laughed together, the first real laughter we'd shared since before Victoria's diagnosis. It felt like healing. Later that night, as Serafina got ready to drive back to her new apartment, a place Julian had never seen, never contaminated with his presence, she hugged me tightly. "Thank you for protecting me," she said. "Even when I fought you, even when I didn't understand, you kept Mum's promise. That's what fathers do. Not all fathers. I know how hard it was keeping that secret, letting me think you were holding up the inheritance for no reason. You could have told me the truth at any time and risked Julian finding out about the money. No, sweetheart. Sometimes protection means letting people think the worst of you." She pulled back and looked at me. "Seriously, I'll never doubt you again, Dad, ever. You don't need to promise that. Just promise me you'll trust yourself. Your instincts are good. Julian just taught you to ignore them." After she left, I sat in my chair with a photo of Victoria, the same one I'd talked to during those dark days when Julian was trying to steal our daughter's future. "We did it, sweetheart," I whispered to her image. "Our little girl is free." A year later, Serafina met Daniel, a widowed doctor who worked at her hospital. He was kind, patient, and completely uninterested in her financial situation. When she told him about the inheritance months into their relationship, his response was to suggest they sign a prenup to protect her assets. I walked her down the aisle again, but this time the tears in my eyes were tears of joy. Victoria's ring sparkled on Serafina's finger, and as she exchanged vows with a man who truly loved her, I knew that all the pain, all the struggle, all the difficult decisions had been worth it. The inheritance that Julian had tried so desperately to steal became the foundation for Serafina's new life. Not just the money, but the knowledge that she was protected, valued, and truly loved. Victoria's final gift to our daughter wasn't just financial security, but the wisdom to recognize the difference between a predator and a partner. As I watched Serafina dance with her new husband at the reception, I felt Victoria's presence beside me, and I could almost hear her whisper, "Well done. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are Minister of Revenge favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.